Before we start, I just want to make a brief announcement in connection with the work of the Commission. Some months ago, I informed the President of the Republic, President Ramaphosa, that it was the intention of the Commission to obtain affidavits from past and present members of the Cabinet and deputy ministers so that they could inform the Commission whether they had had any relationship or dealings or interactions with the Gupta family, as well as or their companies or entities, as well as whether they had had any relationship or dealings or interactions with Bosasa or Bosasa's subsidiaries or officials or managers or directors of Bosasa, so that the Commission could look at the information. And I informed the President that I thought that as President, he should be the first one to give the Commission his own affidavit disclosing to the Commission if he had had any relationship with the Gupta family or their entities, as well as with Bosasa or Bosasa entities or personalities in Bosasa, before the Commission could ask ministers and deputy ministers for such affidavits, and so that they could disclose the same information. The President accepted that this was necessary and indicated that he would definitely furnish the Commission with an affidavit making such disclosures on his part. He also undertook to encourage ministers, cabinet ministers, that when they are approached by the Commission in this regard, they should cooperate. I just wish to announce that I did receive about, or early in July, such an affidavit from the President. And he has made a request that the Commission discloses the affidavit to the public so that there should be no speculation about what the affidavit may be saying. I have decided to grant this request and will therefore make available to the media the affidavit that he has furnished to to the Commission in regard to those two matters. I emphasize that he made the request that the Commission discloses the information, the affidavit, to the public, because I do not want any impression to be created that this means that each time we get any such affidavits, we would necessarily disclose them before the deponent thereto gives evidence in the Commission. Obviously, ultimately, the public would know what the contents of the affidavits that will be submitted by past and present ministers in regard to such an issue. But it may be that if it is contemplated that a minister will give evidence at a certain stage before the Commission, it may be that it would be decided not to disclose it until the minister gives evidence. But in this particular case, as I say, the President has requested that it be made, it be disclosed to the public. In this regard, I just want to emphasize that, bearing in mind the evidence that I have had since August last year in relation to the Gupta family and Bosasa, it is important that the Commission gets a full idea of what relationships those entities may have had or may still have with people who are in the National Executive now or may have been in the National Executive in the past. The second point I wanted to mention is that I believe I indicated recently, within the context of the former president, Mr. Jacob Zuma, having been required to appear before the Commission, that he was not the only leader that would be asked to appear before the Commission, and that there would be others, there will be others who will appear before the Commission. I take this opportunity to indicate that some months back, I informed President Ramaphosa that I believed that the work of this Commission could not be said to be properly completed if this Commission did not hear evidence from those who may have been part of the leadership in government over the years, to which some of the matters that the Commission is investigating have been mentioned, where matters have been mentioned relating to state capture and other issues that the Commission is investigating, and that it would be important that at least some of the people who were in leadership should come before the Commission and give evidence about when they may have realized that there was state capture taking place, what they did about it as part of the leadership, and explain to the nation through the commission what they may wish to explain. And in that regard, I informed the former president that since he was deputy president of the country for a few years, which are covered by some of the allegations, it would be necessary that he should appear before the commission and give evidence about some of these matters. I also indicated that the same would, in my view, apply to the ruling party, because over the years, the ruling party has been given a mandate by the people of South Africa to form a government, to govern. And the people of South Africa may be asking questions as to when it itself realized that there were acts of state capture happening, or that there was state capture, and what it did to stop state capture. And that for that reason, I was informing him also in his capacity as president of the ruling party that it will be necessary for the leadership of the ruling party to appear before the commission and explain to the nation through the commission what they did and make a contribution to the nation understanding exactly what happened. I say this in part to make the point that it was not just former President Zuma who had to appear here. I intend that certain leaders who are important in the country or who have had important roles to play in the country should appear before the commission and give evidence about various matters. In response to all this, President Ramaphosa indicated that he fully agreed with me that it was necessary that leaders in government and in the ruling party should come before the commission, appear, and make their input and say what they know, explain what they need to explain. And he embraced the idea. He gave me an undertaking that if and when I say he should come to the commission to give evidence, he will come. My understanding is that that is the case with both, not only government, but also with the ruling party. I thought it was important to just explain this, announce this, as I release President Ramaphosa's affidavit, so that everybody would understand at least part of the work that the Commission is doing. We will soon be approaching ministers, cabinet ministers and deputy ministers, past and present, and asking them to depose 2 similar affidavits with regard to any relationship or relationships or dealings or interactions that they may have had as individuals or as ministers or deputy ministers with the Gupta family or companies involved, Gupta companies or Busasa subsidiaries, or people who are involved in Busasa. I will then now give my registrar the President's affidavit. He will give them to Reverend Stemela, and there are a few of them here. Reverend Stemela will give them to the media people who are here. So there is an advantage in being here. So if you are here, you get them immediately. Others who are not here, they may have to wait before they get them. Thank you. That is the end of the announcement. Thank you. Are you ready, Ms. Tabashi?
Yes, I am, Chairman. Good afternoon again, Chairman.
Yes, good afternoon. Yes.
The legal team is about to lead the evidence of one Mr. Dumisani Cele, who will present evidence in relation to his interaction with the then CEO, the then HOD and CFO of the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development in the Free State, Mr. Peter Tabete and Ms. Sipati Dlamini, respectively. The exhibit we are using this afternoon, Chairman, is Exhibit HH8. May this document be admitted into the record.
Yes, the file containing the affidavit of Mr. Dumisani Cele will be marked Exhibit WH8.
Thank you, Chairman. For this afternoon's purposes, Chairman, we are likely to use reference bundle A and possibly the media bundle. With your leave, Chairman, might I also ask that a new bundle be handed up to you? It really is a little bit of a duplication. We just thought it's more convenient to package it the way we have just packaged it. And that is Exhibit HH, National Treasury Report 2014 with annexures. It's just a reference file, really, Chairman.
I think these files are starting to be confusing. I see there are 2 Bs, that one is the reports bundle, another one is reference bundle.
So we are dealing with the reports bundle, Chairman.
Yeah, I've got the Exhibit WH8, which has got Mr. Cele's affidavit. You say I must also have reference bundle A.
Yes, Chairman.
And what else?
And the reports bundle B you just identified a minute ago. But given the
Yes,
time
I've got
of
them,
the
yeah.
afternoon, Chairman, I might just indicate that there are documents there that are of importance without necessarily taking you to them. With your
Yes.
permission, if I might do that. And
Yes.
when we make our submissions, we'll make sure we indicate clearly that these are the documents
Yes.
we referred to.
Okay. Did you say you want to get rid of those that I might not need here?
If you don't mind, Chairman, let's keep them there. But I'm actually also going to try and time myself
Yes.
because Mr. Cele is on a 10 to 6 flight
What time must it be out of here?
at 4 o'clock, Chairman.
Okay, I think let's get going then. Okay, I've got Exhibit WH8, I've got Reference Bundle A and Reports Bundle B.
Thank you, Chair.
Bundle B, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Cele is ready to be sworn in, Chairman.
Please administer the oath of affirmation.
Please state your full names for the record.
I'm Dimsani Savikwele.
Do you have any objection into taking the prescribed oath?
No.
Do you consider the oath to be binding to on your conscience?
Yes.
Do you swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you.
Mr. Cele, you have bundle HH8 in front of you.
That's correct, Chair.
If you could please go to page 1 of that document and hold on to it. Go to page 2 as well. That's really just a 2-page document. Can you identify the name on page 1? The mic will not pick up the nod.
Dimsani Cele.
And then on page 2, just above the word deponent, there's a signature. Whose signature is that?
It's my signature, Chair.
And when did you sign this document and where did you sign it?
On the 17th of June 2019, Chair, in Pietermaritzburg.
It says here Durban.
I mean, Durban, sorry.
You're confirming that you...
Yes, it was in Durban.
You did this in Durban, deposit. Thank you. This document really is a very short document. You, for one, refer to Annexure DC1, which you have annexed to the statement of yours. You also refer to Annexure DC2, which forms part of the presentation you will be doing this afternoon. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Annexure DC1 constitutes a affidavit you had filed in a criminal investigation. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chair.
And then Annexure DC2 relates to a report prepared for National Treasury by a team of investigators. You were a member of that team of investigators.
That is correct, Chair.
Thank you. Let's immediately go to DC1. Mr. Cele, I take it there are no changes you want to make to that short 2-page affidavit that you've submitted? Thank
Nothing,
you.
Chair.
Can you please just give the chairman a sense of your background? Who are you? Where do you live? Are you employed? And if I can compound, just the employment-related areas, really. Where were you employed during the period 2013 to 2014? Let's deal with the employment.
And your qualifications.
All right. Chair, I did become degree at University of Natal, now the UKZN. I did a national diploma in criminal justice and forensic auditing with the former Rand Afrikaans University. I think it's UJ now. I also then qualified as a CFE, Certified Fraud Examiner, with the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners Association. Chair, during the period I was employed by the National Treasury as a director within a unit called Specialized Audit Services. The unit, in a nutshell, was responsible for investigations as well as performance auditing. The two arms of this unit, Chair, performance auditing was mainly responsible for checking value for money in the government projects, whilst the other arm that I was responsible for was merely responsible for the investigations. And how we received or initiated investigations was through initiatives, through media articles, as well as through complaints that would be lodged with the National Treasury.
Can I just ask you to pause for 1 minute? The unit that you were a member of, the Specialized Audit Services Unit, was established when?
It was established, Chair, in 2010.
And who established it?
It was established by the National Treasury, but we were the first employees. I think there were 3 of us. It was myself, my other colleague was responsible for performance auditing, as well as our supervisor, who was the chief director.
And the unit was headed by who, or who did you report to within National Treasury?
I reported to the chief director, who in turn would report to the Accountant General. Our division was that of the Accountant General of South Africa.
Are there provincial counterparts to the unit that you were a member of? Because you were a member of the national office, were you not?
There are no provincial counterparts for the unit, Chairperson. Rather, there are provincial departments for the Treasury, but not for the unit. The unit was situated at national and only operated at national level.
And that's the reason that somebody from the Free State, for instance, did not conduct this investigation.
The reason I wouldn't know in terms of how the province itself was structured in terms of conducting investigations, having regard to the minimum anti-corruption cabinet memo of 2003 that every government institution was forced to. But the National Treasury has powers and duties to monitor and enforce compliance with the prescripts. That is why we then did these investigations.
And the prescripts you refer to would be, just give us bullet points. I know the chairman is familiar with them, but I'd like you to repeat them. Starting with the Constitution.
The prescript, Chair, start with the Constitution. I believe Section 216, which establishes the National Treasury. Section 217 of the Constitution then says there should be a fair, equitable, and transparent process of procurement of goods and services. Then there's an act called the Public Finance Management Act. Chapter 2 of that act establishes the National Treasury. And chapter 2 actually deals with the powers and the mandate of the National Treasury. And what is also relevant and important for this, I think, is to mention, Chairperson, Chapter 9, which deals with the General Treasury matters.
Then at municipal level, which I'm looking at your paragraph 5 of DC1, Which act is relevant?
The Public Finance Management Act, Chairperson, regulates department, constitutional institutions as well as public entities. But then at local level, that's the municipalities. There's another act, that's the Municipal Finance Management Act, that deals with the local sphere of government.
Back to your unit, what are the key objectives of this unit? And in that regard, I can refer you to paragraph 4
Yes.
of DC1.
Yes. Chairperson, the key objectives of the unit, it was to provide performance auditing as well as investigative capacity in all spheres of government on a broad range of financial management and internal control system in the supply chain management of public procurement. If I may emphasize, Chairperson, in the supply chain.
Yes. And then in relation to the powers vested in you by virtue of the office you occupied, what were those?
Chairperson, we were allowed access to every procurement-related documentation across all the spheres of government.
You have explained that what would prompt an investigation would be own initiative, complaints, etc. What caused you to take an interest in the Free State Department of Agriculture and Rural Development in or around 2013?
Chair, the National Treasury had received a media inquiry. I believe it was from Mail and Guardian. It was the media inquiry that made us to institute an investigation into the transaction regarding the Friede farm by the Free State Department of Agriculture.
Are you able to just give a brief summary of the issues that were brought to your attention by the Mail and Guardian newspaper? I know you've noted them in paragraphs 9 and 10 of Annexure DC 1.
In the main, Chair, they wanted to verify if this was a triple P, that is a public-private partnership, or if the service provider was appointed as a sole supplier. Secondly, they wanted to know if the amount, what was the amount that had been expended on the project, and if it was budgeted for. In the main, that's what they wanted to know.
How did you go about your investigation once this particular matter was assigned to your office?
Maybe before he deals with that, maybe you can just explain the significance, if any, but I think there is, of whether the project was a PPP project or a sole supplier. I think I know about what the significance would be about whether it was a sole supplier or not, but you may as well explain them both. But I'm not sure what the significance of the inquiry, whether it was a PPP or not.
Chairman, are you going to allow me to get to it in due course, 2 pages down? I don't mind if you want the answer now.
No, I want it now, yeah.
Okay. On its own, that's fine.
Chairperson, I think from the media inquiry, they just wanted to make sure that proper procurement processes were followed. Hence, they were asking whether it's a triple P or a sole provider. And perhaps the reason they would have gone to National Treasury is because some of the functions of the National Treasury are not delegated to any other treasury and or department. They reside within the National Treasury.
But the sole supplier, my understanding might be or is that in terms of procurement procedures or provisions, if it's a sole supplier, there may be a justification not to follow certain procedures. But I wonder whether if it's a PPP, a similar connotation applies or not. I think that's what I was wanting to find out.
Thank you, Chair. If it's a triple P, it gets done only through the National Treasury.
Okay.
Wherever you are in the country, you only do it through the National Treasury.
Okay.
There is about 3 levels of approvals
Yes.
that get provided by the National Treasury.
Yes.
And it gets actively involved in the process of the procurement.
Oh, okay. No, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The issues the Chairman is raising with you really form part of the SCM policy.
That's correct, Chair.
What does the SCM policy document that applied in the Free State Department of Agriculture provide for in relation to agreements between the department and service providers? Maybe you want to turn to the actual document, if it will be of assistance to you. I have it in reference bundle A, Chairman, at page 325. Reference, not reports, but reference bundle A.
Yeah.
It's just convenient possibly for you
It's
to
a
have it there.
big liver arch file. I think show him both, also the reports bundle, show him both so that if the reports bundle is required, he will know which one.
So it's page 325. Sorry. Are you able to confirm whether that is in fact, when you have a quick look at it, the SCM policy document that applied in the Free State?
That is correct, Chair.
If you go to the last page of that document, and that would be page 359. You have the signature of the accounting officer on that page, 359.
That is correct, Chair.
And it is dated the 1st of April, 2012.
That is correct, Chair.
So what would that document represent?
It would represent a confirmation that the department had an SCM policy and that was properly approved by the accounting officer.
Who would have drafted this particular document?
That, Chairperson, is difficult to say because some institutions will appoint somebody to draft on their behalf. Some, they would do it internally. So it will be difficult to say who could have drafted it.
Is there a template that provincial officers that draft their own policy documents get from National Treasury? Or are people at liberty to put any clause they feel like putting into a SCM policy document?
Chairperson, there is a framework from the National Treasury, and as a result, most institutions, they would simply take that actual template and adopt it officially as their policy. So other than the template, there are prescript or instruction notes that are written to indicate what shall be contained in the SCM policy.
So in this instance, I look at the broader prescripts you've said. That SCM policy document must comply with Section 217 of the Constitution. Is that right?
That is correct, Chair.
It must comply with Section 38, 1A, Roman 3 of the PFMA,
That is correct, Chair.
and it must comply with Treasury Regulation 16A.
Not just 16A, but all the Treasury regulations, Chair.
If you turn to your affidavit, DC 2, and it's really page 38 of the paginated papers. The document we are looking at is titled The Final Report on Investigation into the Vrede Dairy Farm Project. And this is the document that comprises all the information you and the investigative team were able to put together for purposes of filing the report. At page 38, three-quarter way down the page, you've got a heading that says the prescribed procurement process. It goes across to page 39, and I would really just like you to read into the record paragraph 2.2.37, but specifically the 3 bullet points, and explain those to the chairman.
Chair, maybe before going to the 3 bullet points, let me take the paragraph that precedes the bullet points. It says section 3.5 of the policy states that the accounting officer may deviate from the prescribed process in only 3 circumstances. First circumstances, it is impractical to invite competitive bids because there is an emergency or an urgent matter that needs to be resolved. The second circumstance, that the service provider is a sole provider. The service provider must provide an original affidavit stating this. The third circumstance, in exceptional cases such as repairs and maintenance of equipment, plumbing services, school uniforms, medical services, and medicine, etc.
So in essence, what is being defined here is the basis on which a public officer in the Free State, certainly in the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, the basis on which they might deviate from stated and set policy on procurement.
That is correct, Chair.
Can I just take a sideward step for 1 minute and say, you are helping us understand the nature of a deviation and when a deviation would apply in circumstances that a head of department stipulates. Dr. Masiteng was here a couple of days ago, and the chairman was interested in understanding when a initiator or when the person who submits a document that requests a deviation, when such person acts lawfully and unlawfully, and or, just the difference. What's a lawful document, and what is lawful conduct in preparing a document, and what is unlawful conduct? Can you just help the chairman from your perspective, just knowing the rules? When can an initiator who is asked to prepare a submission that includes a deviation, when is that person acting lawfully? When would that person be acting unlawfully?
Chairperson, what is important is to note that the accounting officer must approve that deviation. So the accounting officer must apply his or her mind. And thus the person initiating must be truthful. So if I'm the initiator and I misrepresent on the motivation, then I would obviously be acting unlawfully. That's just one good example that comes to my mind right now.
Can I refer you back to reference bundle A, specifically to page 187? My apologies. My apologies, Chairman. It's actually the reports bundle that I'm looking at. The reports bundle B. Reports bundle B.
And the page?
Page 187, 188, 189. So this is an example of somebody who prepared a memo that included a deviation. If you could have a quick look at it. And explain to the chairman whether, in your view, knowing the SCM policy framework, knowing the rules that apply to procurement, knowing what the nature of a deviation is, can you give the chairman a view on whether this document as it stands has all the elements of a document that includes a deviation?
Chairperson, the first thing I'm noting here, I just read now into record an excerpt of their own SCM policy. They say you may deviate under 3 circumstances. I can't see anywhere in this motivation where it tells the accounting officer for which of the 3 reasons are they deviating. Is it because it's impractical to obtain or to follow the procurement process? Is it because this is a sole service provider? Or is it because it's in an exceptional case? It doesn't state anything.
But of course, when you look at page 190, there is a summary there under recommendation. Please have a look at that and advise the chairman as to whether that would suffice as a recommendation that any head of department ought to act on.
You see, Chair, this because unfortunately I was also involved in checking in verifying whether this was reported as it is required in terms of the prescript. Now, reading at this, it shows why it would have not been reported to the other relevant institutions, because it does not say why they wanted to deviate from the normal process.
So your evidence is the first hoop that an accounting officer must jump is there must be a rationale, a good reason that fits the prescripts of both the legislation and the policy document. For those, he must meet those standards before a deviation would be allowed.
That's correct, Chairperson. Otherwise, it fails the test of the Section 217 of the Constitution. Where would be the fairness if it's not an objective criteria that causes them to deviate from the normal procurement process?
Then the second hoop that they must jump is that of reporting. Explain to the chairman where an accounting officer is satisfied that he's got the right documentation, he approves the documentation that includes a deviation. What's the next step that accounting officer must take?
Chairperson, it doesn't end with the accounting officer approving such request. Once the accounting officer approves this request, there is an instruction note. Chairperson, just for clarity, instruction note is the actual terminology in terms of the Act.
Yes, from the National Treasury.
Yes, but generally we used to call them, or not we still in government call them practice notes.
Yes,
so that's one of the same thing.
Yeah, well, I guess they amount to the same thing.
Yes.
Yeah,
The practice note, Chairperson, says within 10 working days, the accounting officer must report to the Auditor General, the relevant treasury. And by relevant treasury here, Chairperson, means, I said there's a national treasury and there's provincial treasury, depending on where you are in terms of the provinces. And depending if that activity is delegated to the provincial treasury. Because, for instance, you cannot report the PP to a provincial treasury. So that's what it means by the relevant treasury. So the accounting officer in this instance had to report in writing to the provincial treasury that he has deviated, and these were the reasons he has deviated. And the reason for that, Chairperson, is for the treasury to apply its mind whether it should condone or not that irregular expenditure.
So where an HOD takes the attitude that he is authorized to permit a deviation, that actually is not sufficient.
He is authorized to, he or she is authorized to approve the deviation within the prescripts, I mean, within the ambit of the law. It's not discretionarily upon any person to say, I'm the accounting officer, I'll use the discretion. It must be within the ambits of the law.
But in essence, that is Mr. Tabete's response to queries that your team put to him about why he approved this particular deviation. Short response was, because I'm the accounting officer and I can do it. I paraphrase, of course.
Yes, Chairperson, I think his problem did not start there. It started when he said to me, we do not have powers to investigate this.
We'll get to that evidence in a minute.
So here too, I think he misunderstood what the prescript required of him.
And yet,
yeah, okay, just ask the question.
and yet, when I go back to reference bundle A, page 359, where he has signed the SCM policy document, what does him signing that document mean he has internalized?
It means he has agreed with the prescript.
Yes.
And looking at the policy that he approved, it conforms to the requirements of the prescript.
Yes. Chairman, you wanted to?
It's important to understand the different roles of different role players in this kind of situation. When Dr. Masiteng gave evidence here, one of the questions I asked him, with reference to page 190, which you have got in front of you, related to the recommendation that appears at the top of that page. And I asked him the question, who was making this recommendation? And it was clear from my question that I was also asking, to whom was the recommendation being made? Who was making the recommendation? To whom? Obviously also for what? Because my reading of it within the context of the whole document was that the person who submits the document makes that recommendation, and the person who recommends reads the document and the recommendation and recommends, if that is what he or she decides should be done, that it be approved. And then when it reaches the HOD, then he or she approves. But of course, he gave a certain context to this. But I ask this question to you in general. Would that be the correct understanding of the roles of people who would play a role in a proposal such as this? That the one who submits is the one who is making a proposal, making a recommendation that the approver ultimately must approve, and that anyone in between who is supposed to indicate whether they recommend indicates, or do I misunderstand something?
Chair, your understanding is correct. You need somebody who's normally from the line. That is the person wherein the project will be residing. That's the person whose vote will be used to pay. To seek permission from the authorized official to say, I would like to deviate from the process, and these are my reasons for deviating. And I see it went through the correct channel, because I see also the CFO signed. The CFO, because she is the custodian of the SCM policy. That is why she would also have to either recommend or not recommend on the document. Then the accounting officer then approved. But your understanding, Chair, is correct.
And of course, you have just made the point that the CFO is the custodian of an SCM policy. And that would mean that when she received this document, or when she receives any document such as this, she would be quite clear as to what to expect to be in the document before she could recommend a deviation. Is my understanding correct? She would be quite clear what the document must address before she can recommend that a deviation be approved.
That is quite correct, Chairperson. Remember, the head of department would also rely on the recommendation and or advice by this person as the custodian of the policy.
Of all the people, if she is the custodian, she should be the expert on this policy.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Yes. And I think this, you made the point, and I think Dr. Maseteng made the point also in his evidence, that in this document, there is not a single sentence on the grounds for deviation that are authorized to say this is where this fits in. So one wonders then, one, why the compiler who submitted this didn't address that, but let's take it that maybe because he or she is not the custodian of the policy, let's say maybe he might not be as clear as the CFO, but the CFO can't have an excuse of not knowing what the requirements are. Therefore, you wonder why the CFO would have said she was recommending that a deviation be approved in circumstances where the document doesn't deal with any of the grounds of deviation. And I take it that the HOD certainly, or any HOD should know the grounds of deviation in procurement matter. Am I expecting too much from HODs and CFOs?
Not really, Chair. And you are correct in saying, for instance, it could be that Dr. Masiteng here didn't know how well, maybe it was the first time, we do not know that he had to prepare a document of this sort.
Yes.
But it behooved the CFO to advise him to say, but you must specify why do you want to deviate, because we're supposed to be following the normal process. We should, everybody should have a fair chance of getting this contract. So if he was not advised, then it means the CFO
Yes.
was comfortable with whatever he had put into the document. But also, you are correct, the accounting officer should have known, because he is the one responsible to account to the other relevant stakeholders to say why I authorize somebody to deviate. So you can't have an excuse also.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Is it a good enough excuse for the HOD to say, I'd only been in this post for 1 month. I really wasn't aware of the intricacies of deviations. He arrived at this department, well, he was promoted to HOD in March 2012. In April 2012, he signs this document. In June 2012, he signs the first agreement. It's found to be invalid. In July 2012, he signs the second agreement. All I'm asking is, given those short time frames, is it a good enough excuse for an HOD to say, I didn't realize because I just arrived in this post?
Chairperson, there's few things that have been brought to my attention here, is that he had been promoted, and I don't know what level, but I would assume he would have been at a senior management level already.
Yeah.
It's called SMS level in government. So he ought to have known the prescript in any event before he became the accounting officer. So that can be an excuse. But also, I wanted to look at the dates, because fortunately the SCM policy appears to have been approved by the HOD. So he would have known that he has just approved a policy that sets out at least 3 requirements for him to deviate. So that can't be an excuse.
And I guess while on the one hand, in certain circumstances, the fact that a person has just arrived in a job may put a certain color to circumstances. On the other hand, that might be all the more reason why you want to be careful. Because you say, I'm in an environment that I don't know, so let me be more careful. Let me have a look at things and certify myself that this is in order, particularly because the case we are dealing with doesn't seem to be, insofar as this document is concerned, doesn't seem to be a case where they put forward some facts which they may interpret as falling within one of the 3 exceptions or categories. It's a case where there is absolutely nothing, because if they put up certain facts, maybe there could be an argument. They say, we saw these facts as just as falling under this, but you see them differently. But in good faith, that's how we saw them. But here there is just nothing. And it makes one wonder how the CFO couldn't have seen that there were simply no circumstances justifying deviation. But I'm sure she will come here and she will provide some explanation.
I'm sure she will come, Chairman. Chairman, a more disturbing scenario, now that you've painted the first 2, is where a particular person is deliberately promoted into a post, knowing that that person's interpretation of certain prescripts goes a particular way. You know, because you just look at the timelines here and they really are quite strange. But that's for us to find out as we proceed in digging into what happened in this instance. It might be an opportune time to just take us through what you did to verify whether the Free State Department of Agriculture and Rural Development had set up a PPP in relation to its agreement with Estina.
Chairperson, that was very easy for me. As I said, that resides within the National Treasury. There is a specific unit that deals with that. So mine was to simply go there, check if there was a triple P registered for the Free State Department of Agriculture. And the answer was negative. Then the next step was to now verify whether or not this was a sole provider. And that, unfortunately, we could only verify once we obtained documentation from the department.
Let's go to that part of the investigation in that case. So you investigated and you wanted to know whether the agreement that had been signed fitted the category of a sole provider. What did you do in investigating this aspect?
The first thing, Chairperson, was to check with the Treasury, Provincial Treasury. And the answer again, that is, I was checking whether a deviation was reported for this particular transaction. And again, the answer was negative here from the Provincial Treasury. They said there was no such deviation that had been reported. Then the next step was to now approach the department. The first two steps that I spoke about was even before we could approach the department. We now had to approach the department to obtain documentation and see what process, if any, was followed to engage this service provider. And I prepared a letter, Chairperson, which I also signed on behalf of my supervisor. And then we sent it through to the department. And we received a response which sort of was sort of questioning on what authority I had or the person who would have signed the letter.
Who did you get that response from?
My recollection is that the response was coming from the HOD.
Yes, continue.
Mr. Tabede.
Mr. Tabede, that's correct. Then once we realized that that was the approach they were taking, we did not do our normal process of having it signed by my immediate supervisor, who's the chief director. We took the exact same letter and I got it signed by the accountant general. Then I took it with me to Free State to visit the department, wherein I wanted to have access to the documentation.
But before you explain the next step, I'd like you to go to page 6, DC, that's your affidavit. It's paginated page 6. Okay. And just quickly take the chairman through the 7 investigative objectives you hope to achieve by going to see the HOD.
Chairperson, one, it was to see if the project was approved as a triple P arrangement as a sole provider engagement. This, remember, I have already said, I had already verified from our department internally, but give people benefit of doubt. Just see if maybe they misunderstood how the triple P was done. And also to verify the supply chain management process followed in the appointment of Estina/Paris, to verify how much the department committed and the source of the funds, that is the vote or because in terms of the media articles, there was an indication that some of the funds could be coming from the national department, and if there was any capital injection by the service provider to the project. The fourth one was to investigate the reasons and supporting documentation for the basic accounting system payment, we call it BAS, made in excess of the 30 million, which was said to be available by the department. Also to verify if there were any beneficiaries identified for the Agri-BEE and who were they. To also establish through liaising with the Agri-SA whether there was value for money to the state on this project. The last one was to establish if the then state of the project and provide recommendations.
Yes, so in terms of what you then did physically, please take the chairman through the steps you took.
Then, Chair, I took the letter with me. Remember, Chair, I said I had already verified that there was no registered Triple P with National Treasury. I checked with the Provincial Treasury, there was no deviation reported. I realized there was something amiss here. We then decided to appoint a service provider to assist this. Then I took one of the team members from the service provider with me to the Free State to meet the HOD. And on that first visit with the HOD, and remember they had already had access to the letter, so they knew what is it that we were looking for. On the passage, as we were walking towards his office.
Whose office?
HOD's office.
Yes, who were you with?
I was with a lady from ENS. That's the service provider that we had appointed.
Who else was there?
And then there was the CFO. Then the CFO.
CFO of the department.
Of the department.
Miss Lamini.
Miss Lamini, that's correct. Then the CFO whispered to me in Sesotho, Dubisane, Basotho batla ho bolaya, meaning the Sotho are going to kill me, the Basotho people. And I wondered, why are they going to kill me? Because
why would the Basotho people kill you?
Yeah. But in any event, let me hasten to say, Chairperson, I did not take that as a threat from her, but rather as a warning that I think I must be very careful. Yeah. Yes, I took it as a warning. And I translated it to the lady that I was with from ENS, what she had just said. Then we proceeded to the meeting.
At that stage, you didn't know, or did you know what her role was in this whole thing, Ms. Lamini?
Chairperson, I knew because I had communicated with her over the phone before.
Okay, okay.
So I knew who she was.
Okay, okay. It's just that it's strange that she's talking like other people should not be involved in that. And of course, she brings in the ethnicity element. Yes, okay.
Yes, continue. So you walk down the passage to Mr. Tabete's office.
Yes. Then we had a meeting there. I produced the letter again, that now signed by the Accountant General. And he basically said, look, we do not have powers to come and investigate this matter. And we argued, I tried to take him through the prescript as to where do we get the powers from. But he was very apprehensive and he was not happy that we were going to look into this matter. But eventually I said, sir, please just help me, give me the documentation. He eventually said he was going to lodge intergovernmental dispute. I said, that's within your right, go ahead, but so long I need the documentation. And he promised to courier them to me because...
I mean, dispute for what? Really?
The dispute, Chairperson, was based on the fact that we as National Treasury, he saw us as interfering. Because he didn't want us to...
But you give them money as National Treasury, and you have the responsibility to check certain things.
Chair,
and as HOD, he knows that. He would have known that.
That's not his view, Chair. His view is that he's the accounting officer. Hence, I had to remind him, you've got delegated powers. The powers is with the Minister of Finance. And when he said he was going to lodge a dispute, I said, well, that's your choice. And I waited for the dispute until I left National Treasury.
Did you get any documentation at all from him?
Not on the day, Chair. He said he was going to...
So he flatly refused on that day?
Not really. Eventually, he was amenable to providing documentation, but he said they were not ready. He was going to courier them. So I left without any documentation. The documents were later couriered to our office, and when I went through them, I realized that most important documents were still not there. Hence, I had to go again to the department.
So you went back to Bloemfontein?
That is correct.
Tell the chairman about that visit. Who did you go with this time?
The second visit, I went there with another colleague again from ENS. It was a gentleman this time. First time I had gone there with a lady. This time around it was with a gentleman. But since I had received a friendly warning, I was careful. I had spoken to the then head of Hawks, so he organized for me people from the province. We communicated over the phone. They drove in their car, I drove in my car up until we got to the place, and then they also escorted me back to the airport.
So basically, you had to organize some protection for yourself.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Yes. So I guess that must show how serious the situation was, and how, at least at that time, you were taking how seriously you were taking what Ms. Lamine had told you on the first visit.
Chair, that's how serious it was. I mean,
Yes.
for us as National Treasury to approach the head of the Hawks,
Yes,
that's how seriously we took it.
yes, thank you.
Mr. Cele, so on this visit, where you were hoping to find a pack of the outstanding documentation, or at least to be given the outstanding documentation, were you successful? If you look, continue. So paragraph 17 dealt with the first visit, no documentation. And then you had your subsequent meetings. But do you recall whether you left with the outstanding documentation or not?
My recollection again here, Chairperson, was that I did not get the documentation, simply because I remember from Bloemfontein, I flew back to Johannesburg, and Johannesburg quickly to Durban for another meeting. Otherwise, I would have organized somebody to take those documents to the office if I had them. But I don't think we were given documents again on this visit.
But do you recall what the reason was this time? Or you can't recall?
In the main, Chairperson, it was an issue of, like, we're looking for documents that maybe they're not there, but we were saying these are primary documents. There's no way that they cannot be there. So they should be here. They should be somewhere here.
Mike, Chairman?
Sorry, thank you. This time, the atmosphere, how tense was it? Was there tension in this second meeting with the HOD? Or not really?
Look, Chairperson, having done this work for so long, I try to ignore the tension, so yeah, I just rub it off, and
Okay.
I deal with the people, because
Okay.
I encounter it almost every day.
Yes, yes, okay.
If you look at DC 70, that's again the bundle that has your affidavit, if you go right towards the back to page 70, there is a heading towards the bottom that says specific limitations. And it is clear from what is set out here that Mr. Tabete and or other officials may have withheld investigation, I beg your pardon, may have withheld information from the investigation team. So your report was conclusive, but only in respect of the information that had actually been given to you.
Yes, that's correct, Chairperson. I only visited the department twice, but subsequently the team went there, so I was never part of those meetings. But yes, that was the response they kept providing to me. I mean, the feedback that they're not getting the documentation that they require.
So by the time you prepared your report, you did so still without certain documents that you would have wanted, you would have liked to see.
Chairperson, maybe I must qualify so that it's not interpreted as if I was party to report writing. I was
Yes.
only overseeing the
Yes.
project.
Yes.
because this is an independent firm that is
Yes,
appointed.
oh, okay,
They
yes.
independently compiled
Yes,
the report,
yes.
then they submitted it to me once
Yes, yes.
they were done.
Yes, but they did so still with some documents outstanding that they would have liked and that you would have liked to have been made available.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Okay.
Now, at page 9 of your affidavit, paragraph 21, you set out a conclusion you reached. Please speak to the chairman about that.
Chairperson, we basically saying they failed to follow the proper procurement process, because we're saying even if they had, firstly, which is critical, is that they did not go out on open tender, but secondly, even if they had deviated, they were supposed to report, which they didn't. So hence we are saying they failed just to simply follow the proper procurement process.
I will then ask you to turn to page 64 of the same document while you hold your finger at page 9. And there you have a heading at paragraph 7.1 that reads, conclusions on the supply chain management process followed. I will not ask you to read that. I had thought I would ask you to read it into the record, but because of time, it's not really prudent or appropriate. But you accept that these are the conclusions, certainly on the supply chain management process that you were quite intimately involved in. These were the conclusions you reached.
That is correct, Chairperson.
With respect to the CFO, who co-signed the letter of deviation, what ought the CFO to have done, quite independently of the HOD? My question really is, does she have a relationship at all with Treasury? Can she bounce ideas off Treasury when she's not sure about whether a particular deviation fits the prescripts? What support structures are built into your system to help somebody like that?
Chairperson, at National Treasury, we've got people who support provinces, departments, or entities, and they interact with CFOs in the main. And we've got specialized unit in terms of, for instance, we've got a unit that deals strictly with PFMA. If, for instance, I was out in another province and I had an issue or query in respect of PFMA, there were colleagues that I would always call just to find out, because they deal with it on a daily basis. They will be able to give an answer quickly. But the CFO is the right person that should have advised both Dr. Masiteng as well as the HOD if there was anything untoward in terms of that, or that was not proper in terms of the motivation. And or if she was not clear, she should have sought advice from the relevant officials.
This is, as I understand, this is a basic thing, isn't it?
That's correct, Chair.
Very basic.
That's correct.
And it's not complicated. Whether any one of these three situations exists in a particular case. And if you are given a memorandum that makes a proposal that you should recommend or approve that this situation fits into that situation, it's nothing complex. And it's difficult to understand how a CFO and an HOD, none of them would pick up that the document placed before them doesn't address that critical issue. And it may well be that the failure to report to Treasury that they had approved a deviation has something to do with the HOD having signed, fully aware that there were no grounds for deviating. And maybe he knew that if he reported to Treasury, Treasury would say, but this document which you signed doesn't have a single thing that says this situation falls under one of the exceptions. Stop the whole thing. Maybe that is why, but I don't know. He will come and he will explain. Maybe he'll give an explanation, and maybe I'm looking at it in a different way, and maybe I'm being it's because I'm not a manager and I don't know how these things work, and maybe an HOD who has to deal with lots of these things would understand how an HOD would not pick up something like this.
Chair, you are spot on, and the Treasury does not stop at that. They could have even asked for documentation to see what is happening with this transaction.
And during your interactions with the HOD, he never said, you know what, I realized afterwards that I didn't read this document properly, or I'm realizing now that you are asking me questions that I didn't read it properly. I thought it did address these situations. That was never his attitude, was it?
No, Chair, as I said, for me, whilst I was there, I was still waiting for intergovernmental dispute because he believed that he had done everything according to the book.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Just in context, it means that not only did the CFO get it wrong, the HOD got it wrong, but the Premier of the office of the province got it wrong, because in a response to the Public Protector, the Premier had the following to say. Essentially, maybe I should just paraphrase it, Chairman, that there is no closed list of deviations. So where you have the policy document saying, for example, 1, 2, 3, as I've understood his response, you can add other examples to that list of deviations. So my question is it correct to interpret the policy document as one that has an extended list of deviations, or is the prescript pretty tight and narrow?
Chairperson, let me accept that there's no closed list, maybe from National Treasury, but they themselves had closed it as a department. So how could they then turn around and say it's not closed when they closed it themselves?
But
why I'm saying, Chairperson, maybe there's no closed list, but there's a closed interpretation of when or grounds for deviating. I'm saying that because I know, for instance, in the local sphere, that mainly it's referred to as Section 36 in the local government sphere. I think there's 4 grounds, the 4th being when you're dealing with zoos. So but the interpretation sounds incorrect to me.
Well, let me just read it, the salient part into the record. And this is what it says at paragraph 5.1.16. This is the report of the Public Protector dated February 2018. And it says the following. What is actually contained in paragraph 3.5.1 of the SCM policy is significantly different to what he had just said earlier. It provides that, and I quote, if in a specific case it is impractical to invite competitive bids, e.g., in urgent or emergency cases or in cases of a sole supplier, the goods or service may be procured in accordance with Treasury Regulation 16, capital A, 6.4. The reasons for deviating from inviting competitive bids should be recorded and approved by the accounting officer. He goes on to say, it is consequently clear that urgent or emergency cases or sole suppliers are mentioned as examples and not as exclusive instances when a deviation may be considered. That's the Premier's response to the Public Protector.
That is incorrect, Chair. The key is that it should have been impractical. Then the circumstances for that impracticality may differ from entity A to Z, but not the principle of impracticality.
So the position is, you are told that there are 3 principles or exceptions under which deviation is permitted. And those 3 are the only 3 situations. But the facts which you can use to say, to determine whether a situation fits into one or the other of the 3 situations may differ. But the question will always be, you must look at the facts you have and see whether they fit into any one of the 3 exceptions or principles. If they fit into one or more, you are fine. If they don't fit in any, then you don't have grounds of deviation, isn't it?
That's correct, Chair.
Yes.
I'm back at page 9 of your affidavit, where at paragraph 23, you speak of practice note number 8 of 2007-2008. And there are certain conclusions that you start drawing from paragraph 23, going down across to paragraph 27. If you could just take the chairman through those very briefly. And also explain the importance of practice note number 8.
Okay. Chair, practice note number 8 has a preamble in it. That is, it explains why a need for it in the first place. It was developed simply because it wanted to circumvent or to stop the abuse of deviation. Now, on paragraph 23, I deal mainly with what we have dealt with, that is, under which grounds is the accounting officer authorized or permitted to deviate. Paragraph 24, what is important is that the practice note says, if you have deviated and the amount is above 1 million rand, you must within 10 working days report in writing to the relevant Treasury, auditor, as well as Auditor General.
Now we know the amount here was in excess of 1 million rand, so they were locked in to practice note 8. Continue.
That's correct. The report must include the description of the goods and services, the name of the supplier that we have appointed, the amount involved, and the reasons for dispensing with the normal procurement process. And in this instance, as I said, there was no proof that was produced that it was ever reported. Then paragraph 27 deals with the fact that the Treasury regulations does not only require the accounting officer to provide reasons, but also to report in writing. That's the main issue that I was raising, that it should have been in writing.
Yes, so your conclusion is that at 28, where you say, really, the market had not been tested before they appointed Estina.
That's correct.
information was scarce, no tender was advertised, and in essence, the accounting officer appeared to have abused his powers when appointing Estina.
That's correct.
Well, Dr. Masiteng, when he gave evidence here, said that, in effect, the HOD, when the HOD came to him with the documentation that related to the proposal he was asking him to make and to prepare a document that would justify deviation, he said quite a number of times that he was deviating. So it seems that he was, if there was anything he was clear about, was that this was a case where procurement procedures were supposed normally to be followed if Dr. Masiteng's evidence is true. But he was quite clear that he was deviating from those procedures. And one would have thought that, therefore, he would have made sure that the document he signed to approve deviation contained those reasons if they existed. I know I'm saying something about which you probably have nothing to say. You would say it accords with your report, your team's report.
Chair, there is something to say, although it's news to me that now it's the HOD that initiated it. The PFMA says if the accounting officer foresees that for some reason is not able to comply with the prescripts or with the law, he must then ask for dispensing with that from the Treasury. So if it was the accounting officer who initiated it, he should have gone to the Treasury and say, I want to deviate on this project for A, B, and C.
And not to his subordinates. No. He shouldn't have gone to his
subordinates.
No,
if it was him initiating it,
yeah, he
should have gone to people above him.
Well, Dr. Masiteng was quite clear that the HOD was the one who came to him and asked him to compile a document that would, in effect, seek a deviation. And he said he was deviating. He apparently said that quite a number of times. He was quite clear that he was deviating. So, but you say in that case, he should have gone to Treasury to seek approval.
Yes.
So, thank you.
The only point I want to confirm with you, though, is that where a particular project that an HOD wants to apply a deviation to will be implemented in a particular unit. You called it a vote earlier because every unit gets a vote, gets a certain amount of money. Then the HOD ought to allow that project to be initiated from that unit. That's the ideal. But if the HOD was the initiator, how would he be able to initiate in my unit? Let's assume let's take Dr. Masiteng. He was in charge of district services. This was a district services project. The HOD, as I understand matters, had no choice but to go to the unit where this project was going to be implemented and get them to prepare the documentation that would have to be approved by him. I don't know if you understand my question.
The difficulty here, Chairperson, is that if it is the HOD that's initiating it, who's going to approve? What facts is he going to apply his mind on?
Yeah.
Because it's him asking himself, basically. Yeah. The only thing he has done is ask somebody else to type that which is coming to him.
Yes. Well, that's one of the issues that was highlighted during Dr. Masiteng's evidence, because he the approach of his evidence was that, look, this document was not my document, even though you see my signature there, and I'm reflected as the person who submitted this proposal. I was asked by the HOD to compile a document because he wanted a deviation to be done here. And whatever I was doing, I was just carrying out his instructions. That was the effect of Dr. Masideng's evidence in regard to his role. Hence my question in relation to the recommendation that I told you about, to say, so who is recommending the approval of this document? Because the HOD can't be said to be recommending to himself. He approved. The CFO did recommend. But you submitted a document, and before your signature, all the three signatures, there is a recommendation. So who is speaking to that recommendation? And but we left it on the basis that he gave his perspective. He admits that he signed it, but he says these are the circumstances under which I signed it. I didn't get any benefit out of this whole thing. My HOD came to me. He was clear that he was deviating. He asked me to compile this document. I compiled it. You might not be able to say anything, but I was just giving you the full effect of his evidence in relation to his role. Yes, Mr. Rashid, may proceed.
The only other area I want to touch on, because really I think we've exhausted the whole SCM policy framework, which is really where you were very involved in. Chairman, somebody else will deal with the value for money aspect of this report, and yet somebody else with the financial commitments that were made.
Yes.
But I'd like you to please just go to page 54 of your FE again, and it's really still the ENS report, the National Treasury report, which then talks to the issue of beneficiaries of the Vrede Dairy project. And at paragraph 4.1.1, you set out your findings that beneficiaries for this project were not identified until the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries raised the issue pertinently with them. Do you recall these discussions?
Yeah, yes, Chair, I do recall that, because from the agreements that have been signed, it appeared as if there were beneficiaries from the community. But during the investigation, it transpired that beneficiaries actually came as an afterthought to the project.
In fact, if you then look and maybe possibly just read into the record the 6 recommendations that were made by the director, or rather the coordinator of the CASP allocation. Again, we're still on page 54, project beneficiaries. In italics, you find recommendations. Could you just briefly read those into the record?
Roman figure 1 says, the province must conduct a proper feasibility study.
Let's just pause there. So what the DAFF coordinator concluded was that, having looked at what happened on this project, this was the first recommendation she would make.
That's correct.
And if I recall correctly, it's part of SCM policy that you do a feasibility study first before you start signing documents?
The SCM framework talks about, I think there's about 6 terms, first of which is demand management. That's where you would have done your feasibility study before you actually do the actual procurement of goods and services.
So it's all prescribed in legislation and in the policy documents.
That's correct.
The next one,
The province must develop a business plan for the project.
yes, continue.
Roman figure 3, the province must conduct a biological impact study.
That's an EIA essentially. And the fact that these items are indicated here means that they had not been done when in 2013, when the CASP allocation was made. Continue.
Roman figure 4, the province must get approval for water rights for the projects.
Continue.
Roman figure 5, the province must outline clearly who the 100 smallholder farmers are and mobilize and structure them accordingly.
That's the point you raise under beneficiaries.
That's correct.
And the last one, which is very important,
The 53 million allocated from CASP in 2013-2014 be withdrawn from the project and be directed to incomplete projects in the province and to smallholder farmers.
so on your investigation, having spoken to this particular coordinator, she felt so strongly that she recommended to her Director General that the 53 million that had been allocated to the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development be withdrawn until such time as they have complied with all the prescripts.
To be quite honest, Chairperson, yes, I will say yes because it's part of the report that was eventually submitted to the National Treasury. But unfortunately, at the time when this report was submitted, I was serving my notice period, and I wouldn't recollect all the facts that are contained therein.
Yes.
But at paragraph 30 of your affidavit, I'm back at page 10. You do state that part of the investigation was to identify whether there were any beneficiaries identified for the Agri-BEE.
Yes.
And who they were.
That's correct.
And
At least this one, the team informed me long before they could even draft the report. So immediately when they were on the ground, they found that there were no Agri-BEE beneficiaries.
And that's what you note in paragraph 30.
That's correct.
Then last, you at paragraph 31 use the word in the very last line that Ms. Dlamini and Mr. Tabete could have committed financial misconduct as envisaged in Section 81 of the Act. Set out the forms of financial misconduct that the PFMA provides for, and then put these two officials squarely in the one that you think fits the conduct that they embarked on.
Chairperson, the Act says within your area of responsibility, you must do all to avoid irregular expenditure, unauthorized expenditure, fruitless and wasteful expenditure. And here, this was, right from the onset, it was clear that it was irregular expenditure because it did not adhere to the principles of proper procurement principles.
Chairman, I believe those are the salient issues we really wanted to raise, just given the time. Mr. Cele, are there any other matters you would like to bring to the attention of the chairman before I just tidy up one small matter regarding this document?
It's just one, Chairperson. It's the fact that on the basic accounting system, payment had been uploaded in 2012, but were only approved almost a year later in 2013.
You deal with that at paragraph 29 on page 10.
Yeah.
What was curious about that?
It's the fact that why would it be that a transaction has been initiated on the system and it doesn't get approved for almost a year. And the answer came later during the investigation that it would appear that it's because there was no funding enough for the transaction that had been initiated on the system. Probably everybody else was worried to approve it.
Thank you. Chairman, may I just take Mr. Cele back to page 2, the 2019
Yes.
statement. And I must point out the inconsistency here because we have signed and sworn to before me at Durban,
Yes.
and yet the Commissioner of Oaths gives an address in Pietermaritzburg. Does that mean he lived in Maritzburg, but at the time that he commissioned the document, you opposed to it and signed, he commissioned it, he was in Durban? Could you just explain that to the chairman?
Thank you, Chair. Fortunately, he personally came with it to me, and I signed in Durban.
But he's a Maritzburg man?
Yes, that's correct, Chairman.
Are you satisfied,
because
Chairman?
I think, yes, because I think in terms of the regulations governing commissioners of oaths, he's supposed to give his address.
Yes.
So if his address was a Pietermaritzburg address, that's the address he would give. But the place where the oath is taken must be indicated, and it was indicated correctly.
Thank you,
as
Chairman.
Durban. But I think it was important that you picked that up.
For the record,
Yeah,
just to
yeah.
clarify it.
Yeah.
Chairman, that is the evidence for today. We had hoped to lead the evidence of Mr. Davi Maria, who's been with us all day, but unfortunately the morning session took longer than we anticipated. We need about 2 hours to lead his evidence, and it will not work for this afternoon. So we think we'll move him into our August program. He's got very important information in relation to the value for money proposition and the whole just the dairy industry and the business of raising dairy cows in
Yes.
areas like Freda. So with
Yes.
your leave, Chairman, might we simply move that particular matter, that hearing, into the August schedule?
We can do that, but if everybody was ready for us to continue until 5, I would have been prepared to take a short break and then we continue.
We could, Chairman.
We could.
Yes.
Or then maybe that might help. That is if it suits him as well. Because then if we finish at 5, we might be left with 1 hour
Yeah.
only, which we could accommodate easily later on. But we could go up to 5 and then see how much we have been able to make.
We are comfortable with that,
You are
Chairman.
comfortable with
Yes.
that? Okay.
If you would please excuse Mr.
Yes.
Cele, who has a plane to catch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cele, for having come forward to assist. We appreciate that very much. Should the need arise, we'll call you back, but it seems unlikely when I have regard to the report and what you have told us. But if there is a need, you will be asked to come back. But thank you very much, and you are excused.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So let's take a short break. Maybe what we'll do, we'll make sure that at least once we start with him, we go for a minimum of an hour. So if it means going a little bit over 5 o'clock, that should be fine. 10 past, quarter past. But we will talk at 5. We'll adjourn and resume at 5:15. We adjourn. Are you ready?
We are ready, Chair.
Yes.
Thank
okay.
you. Thank you, Chair. The next witness whom the legal team is calling is Mr. Deviation Marie. Chair, his evidence is contained in Exhibit HH9, or rather the file marked HH9, and we beg that it be admitted into the record as such.
The liver arch file containing the statement by Mr. David Andreas Murray will be marked Exhibit HH9.
Thank you, Chair. We have taken the liberty to provide the Chair with an additional file. This file contains only the report of Mr. Murray, and this is only for ease of reference so that the Chair can navigate through both the report as well as the relevant annexures.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And we have noted once more that the affidavit was referred to as a sworn affidavit, which is a matter we will rectify moving forward, Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. Chair,
Okay,
the evidence...
I guess it happened before the issue was raised.
Indeed, Chair. I suspect it was a template that was used.
Okay, no, that's fine.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, the evidence of Mr. Murray relates to the review of several documents relative to the Estina project, and from which he draws conclusion on the value for money of the project. And it is on this premise that Mr. Murray prepared the report, which the ENS incorporated into their report dealing with the value for money aspect.
Yes. No,
Thank you,
that's
Chair. Might we request that the witness be sworn in?
fine. Please administer the oath or affirmation.
Please state your full names for the record.
David Andreas Maria.
Do you have any objection into taking the prescribed oath?
No.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes.
Do you swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Is it hot inside here?
It is indeed so, Chair.
Yes. Please advise the Reverend to make it a little cooler. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yes, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Murray, please refer to the bundle marked HH9 that is placed before you. Please turn to page 1 of that file. Is that your name that appears on that page?
Yes, it is.
Can you also turn over to page 3 of that document? Is that your signature appearing on that page?
Chair, it indeed is.
And just below your signature, is that the date on which you signed this affidavit?
Yes, 17th of July 2019.
And are there any corrections that you wish to effect to your statement?
No, not at this stage, Chair.
Do you confirm the correctness of your statement?
Yes, Chair, I do.
Thank you. Can you then turn over to page 4 of the bundle? That is a document that you have annexed as your annexure to your affidavit, and you have so annexed it as CM1. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And what document appears on that page?
That's my curriculum vitae, Chair.
Can you please take the Chair through your qualifications?
Chair, I've matriculated in Ventersdorp High School. After that, I've studied BSc Agriculture, BSc Agriculture Economics, which was conferred on me in 2000. I then did a Master's in Management degree at the University of Antwerp Management School. It is locally evaluated by SAQA as a Master in Business Administration. That was done in 2001, 2002. After that, I've I've done my master's MSc also in agricultural economics, which I completed in 2007.
And what do you currently do?
Chair, I am currently employed by First National Bank Business Agriculture, where I'm one of the senior agricultural economists. I'm also the head of marketing and communication at FNB Agric.
Yes. Can you also take the chair through your employment history?
I will do. Chair, before I've joined FNB, I was...
Well, maybe before that, to the extent that your 2 master's degrees might have something to do with the report that you did there, maybe you could just tell us more about what studies you did there, which might have a bearing on the assignment you were given in regard to the report.
Indeed, Chair, thank you. Yeah, I think the most appropriate one was my thesis for my MSc Agric degree, which is titled The Development of Different Technical, Economic and Financial Benchmarks as a Management Tool for Intensive Milk Producers on the High Veld of South Africa. So that was while I was in the employment of the Milk Producers Organization.
Yes.
I did the study, and it's specifically in the dairy industry.
In the dairy industry. So
Correct.
your master's is in the dairy industry.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And have you written any papers or any work that has been publicized?
Chair, yes, I've done a couple of work and papers and publications. Some of them are referred to on page 8 and 9 of the document. Various articles in the Dairy Mail, which is a semi-scientific magazine for dairy producers. Me and a colleague with the MPO, we've done an investigation into the Zambian dairy industry. As I've said, my master's degree in the benchmarks, and then also various articles for other magazines as well.
And some of the, are any of these magazines or journals professional kind of journals?
Chair,
As such?
The Dairy Mail, as I've said, is a semi-scientific journal or magazine. Then Lacto Data, that's point number 5 on page 8.
Yes.
Lacto Data is the official statistics of the dairy industry in South Africa.
Yes.
It's a publication under the auspices of Milk SA. And then also I've done a paper, a poster paper for the IFCN, or the International Farm Comparison Network Conference in 2008 in Germany.
And the Lacto Data, would that be a magazine that's relied upon by various role players within the dairy industry on certain topics?
Chair, yes, that's more the Dairy Mail. Lacto
Yes.
Data is a statistical publication. It appeared twice a year, and that contains all the statistics of dairy farming in South Africa.
Oh, that one relates to statistics, but the Dairy
Mail is a magazine.
is the one that would be relied upon by role players in the dairy industry.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay.
Perhaps just to clarify that the Lacto Data, on what basis would you rely on the statistical information contained in the collection of that data?
Chair, the Lacto Data is compiled through statistics obtained via a statutory measure through the National Agricultural Marketing Council. That's upon dairy producers. They need to annually submit certain information to the Milk Producers Organization, as well as information of the secondary industry, so that's your milk processors, which falls under the auspices of SAMPRO, the South African Milk Processors Organization. and under Milk SA, because these two bodies together form Milk SA, and through that information we compiled lacto data.
Thank you. Can you then turn with me to Annexure CM2 in that bundle? And that appears on page 10, all the way to page 29 of the bundle. Are you there?
I'm there, thank you.
What document are we looking at from page 10 to 29?
Chair, that is my report that I've written that was commissioned by ENS in December 2013, reviewing 3 different documents that were provided to me in terms of this specific Vrede Integrated Dairy project.
Yes. And if we turn over leaf, on page 11 and 12 is the index, is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
And if we turn again further to page 13 of that document, there the report sets out an introduction that is followed by an overview of the project. On whose understanding have you formulated that overview that appears under your introduction?
Chair, the overview was formulated from the 3 documents that was provided to me by ENS to give an overview of the project, the Vrede Integrated Dairy project. So it all came from those 3 different documents.
Thank you. And if we move further down on that report, the second heading you have entitled Problem Statement. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Now, what were you required to do that resulted in the production of this report? And you will do so by telling the Chair which documents were provided to you in doing so.
Chair, as I've mentioned, ENS provided me 3 documents. The first one was the project proposal, of which there was actually 2 copies, a business plan and a feasibility study. I've met with ENS and they've asked me, and that's related in the terms of reference for this document, to look at the specific project, the reasonableness of the cost, and then in the end, were there value for money for the investment made into this project.
Yes, you've paraphrased those terms of reference as appears on page 13. Can I request you to just read those terms into the record? I note that there are 3 terms of reference that you were provided.
Certainly, for the record, the terms of reference were to review the documents as mentioned above to determine 1, the reasonableness of the cost quoted in the documents, 2, whether there was or would be any benefit for government in the project, thus value for money spent invested, and lastly, any other concerns regarding the feasibility or sustainability of the project.
Well, when I read this, it appeared to me that the heading is wrong. It's not a problem statement. It's your brief, it's your mandate. Am I right?
That's correct, Chair.
Yes, because it doesn't state any problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Murray, what methodology did you adopt in conducting this review investigation?
Chair, so I've received the documents in hard copy from ENS, the 3 mentioned documents. Given my expertise and my, well, I wouldn't say expertise, by knowledge of the dairy industry, and my contacts and network within agriculture, I relied on that, and I've reviewed the documents, given what I have, and also the practical experience that I know or that I have of the dairy industry. I've put that to use in compiling this report.
And did you encounter any limitations in your investigation?
Chair, yes, there were certain limitations in the sense that the documents was, well, some of them were a bit unclear, first of all. Secondly, I think also it was not complete. There was certain information that was not in the documents that would have made the report easier. And then thirdly, I think overall information, especially on the processing side of the specific project, there was limitations on that, getting information on that.
Yes, and you will deal with those limitations as you take the chair through each and every document. Can we then turn over to page 14 of the paginated bundle? From paragraph 1.4 of that report, you provide a background to the dairy industry in South Africa. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
And what is the period in terms of years that you have considered in providing this background?
Chair, since the study was done, or the report was done in 2013, I've obviously used 2013 data and the previous years. Subsequently, the data from Lacto data in November 2013, at that stage was the newest or the latest report, and that used data from 2006 up till 2013 November.
And in your report, you set out the background, firstly, by making reference to the number of dairy farms in the country. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Can you please take the chair through the figures that you discuss in relation to this background?
Chair, I think what's important there is the decline, overall decline in dairy producers in South Africa as a country. We've declined from 3,899 in January 27 up to 2,083 at that stage in September 2013. So there was a substantial decline in the numbers, and specifically related to this project in the Free State, the decline was even more substantial. There was a 75% decrease in dairy producers in that specific province, from 1,067 in January 2006 up to 423 in September 2013.
I'm sorry, Mr. Murray, did you say that the decrease was 75? I have it there
75%, Chair.
Can I refer you to your report? Perhaps
Yes.
I'm not reading this table correctly. In your analysis on the number of milk producers per province, as I understand that table, you set out firstly from the extreme left of that table, you enlist all the provinces. The second column, all the way to the second last column, is the period January 2006 all the way to September 2013.
Correct.
And the last column reflects the change, whether it be a decrease or an increase. When I look at the row where you provide information relative to the Free State, the figure that appears there in the change is minus 57. Perhaps I'm not understanding it when you said that the change was about 70%. Can you please explain that?
Chair, if you look at the heading of that specific column, the last one, it says the percentage change from 07 to 13, so it's 57% decline.
Yes, I thought I heard you say 75%.
Oh, sorry, no, 57.
No, that's fine. There is also a second table that you provide, and you set out in that table information relative to all the provinces again. Can you please explain that table to the Chair?
Chair, yes, that table takes out or shows the milk production per province, and the second part of that table, the number of cows per producer. So if you look at the complete column or the complete table, obviously South Africa would have been 100%, specifically related to this project again. In December 1997, the Free State province contributed 18%, 1/8, to national production of milk. That declined to February 2012, and in February 2012 it was only 10.5%. So you can see there was a significant decrease of milk production in the Free State compared to provinces like the Eastern Cape and KZN, KwaZulu-Natal, which increased over those specific periods.
Yes, please continue.
Chair, the second part of that, it's the number of cows in milk per producer, and that's the information that dairy producers supply to Lactodata or to the Milk Producers Organization. The average cows in milk for the Free State was 111 in 2012, with a median of 79.
Can you explain what a median is and how one is to read that table relative to all the other columns that appear in that table?
Yes, a median is if you have a number of numbers, you take the exact middle, so that's the lower half and the upper half, that would be your median. So your median would be 79 for the Free State, which is substantially lower than provinces which experienced an increase in production, like the Eastern Cape with 365, or KZN with 315. So you can see there's a lot of smaller producers in the Free State province compared to the other provinces.
And are you able to provide any clarity on why there is such a significant decrease in both the number of milk producers, with particular reference to the Free State, as well as the milk production per province, as appears in your second table?
Chair, yes. Dairy industry or the dairy milk production in South Africa followed a certain trend where production shifted from the inland provinces or the high-veld regions more to the coastal areas. One reason for that being climatic conditions. Secondly, the production cost, because in the high-veld you have to supply feed to the cows, whereas in the coastal areas, higher rainfall areas, you have pasture-based production. So dairy in South Africa is divided into two components, the pasture-based and the total mixed ration, or TMR-based production systems. So TMR-based, that relies solely on, well, not solely, but mainly on maize and soybeans as feed, together with a couple of smaller additives, while pasture-based is pasteurized, or pasture. So given the climatic conditions at that time, that shift took place, and also the economies of scale plays a major role into that shift to the coastal areas.
Yes, I've just noticed, Mr. Murray, that where in the second paragraph to your background, that is paragraph 1.4 of your report, as appears on paginated page 14, you make reference to December 2007, and when I read that with your second table, the period that you have cited there is December 1997. Which of the two is the correct dates? Because the table refers to 97, whereas your second paragraph refers to 2007.
Chair, I noted that as well. It should be December 1997.
in the body of your background.
Yeah. So that's
at the beginning
typo.
of the sentence, excuse me, is that a reference to the date at the beginning of the sentence?
Yeah. Chair, yeah, that's the date in the beginning of the sentence compared to the table. So it should be 1997.
December 1997.
December 1997.
Okay.
Thank you, that has been noted. If we then turn over to page 15 of your report, you make a comparison of the dairy project to the trends that you have just articulated to the chair. Can you please take the chair through this comparison that you make?
Chair, yes. The only comparison that I could have drawn at this stage between the specific project and what was going on in the dairy industry in South Africa is the fact that they will be able to achieve economies of scale if they have that number of cows in milk. We saw the trend in South African dairy industry, and it's continuing as well, that the dairies becoming bigger, but they become less. So the bigger dairies or less farmers, but more cows in milk.
Yes, then if we turn over leaf to page 16 of your report, there you start first with your discussion of the documents that were provided to you and which you have already informed the chair of. You then start at paragraph 2.1 of your report to discuss the project proposal. Earlier, when you were making reference to the project proposal, you informed the chair that you were provided with 2 copies of project proposals. Can you please explain that to the chair?
Chair, yes, the copies that I received was 2 different ones. The bodies of the copies were the same. The only difference between the 2 was in the one, and I've said that out, in the first one, and I paraphrase, Estina and Paras would supply a 500 million input into this project with government grants equal to that, 500 million, meaning 100 million over 5 years. While in the second one, the amounts changed to 228 million by Estina Paras and 342 million by government. The one document was signed and the other one was not signed.
Can I ask you to confirm those 2 documents? Please turn to the paginated bundle, page 30. There appears a document all the way to page 37.
That's correct.
Would that be one of the proposals you were provided with?
That was one of the proposals that I was provided with, which was not signed.
Yes. And if you then continue from page 38 of the bundle all the way to page 46, is that the second proposal?
That's the second proposal, Chair, and that was the one that was signed. There was, sorry, Chair, there's another difference between the 2 documents. The second one, the signed copy, has a page, and that would be page 45, which is not in the first document, and it's very unclear. So I didn't even take note of that while compiling my report.
Yes. So other than those differences, have you noted any other differences on the 2 proposals?
Not substantial differences, no, Chair.
And you set out in paragraph 2.1 of your report, and Chair, we've returned to the report as appears on page 16, where you set out the differences relative to the costing as you have indicated to the chair.
That's correct, Chair.
And can you show the chair on the 2 proposals very quickly where those 2 differences in amounts appear?
Most definitely, Chair. The first difference would be on page, just get there, page 35.
Yes.
Which is a fairly clear copy of the detailed project costing. The last 2 lines there, which shows capital injection, IP, equipment, etc. Estina Paras 500 million, grants of 100 million per year for 5 years, Department of Agriculture and Rural Development 500 million.
And that is the first proposal, is that correct?
That's the first proposal, the unsigned one.
Yes.
The signed one, the second one, is a very unclear copy that appear on page 43 of the bundle. And there it shows capital injection of 228 million Estina Paras and the grants of 114 million for 3 years, amounting to 342 million.
And when you were provided with these two documents, was it explained to you why you are being provided with two proposal documents with these changes or rather differences appearing on them?
No, Chair, I wasn't explained the reason, or I wasn't given the reasons for the differences.
Now, that's the first document that you say you considered is the project proposal. So of the two documents, which did you consider in your review investigation?
Chair, I focused mainly on the first one for the simple reason it was the first one in the bundle that I received.
When you say the first one, are you referring to the
unsigned
one? That is the one in our paginated page 30 to 37.
That's correct. And I've made a lot of notes on that as well. So that was the easiest one. It was also much easier to read the numbers in the detailed costing project, and hence I focused on that. When I looked at the second document, the signed copy, I noted, that it's actually the same document apart from that costings that differ.
Yes, you then provide a table in your report at page 16, and it is entitled Table 3, is that correct?
That's correct.
And that table details your comments on the project proposal rather.
That's correct, Chair.
And as I understand the structure of the table, the first column reflects the specific page number of the proposal. Please confirm.
That's correct, Chair.
And the second column reflects the specific content of that business proposal.
That's correct, Chair.
Whereas the third column reflects your comments.
That's correct, Chair.
The first aspect that you deal with is the preamble. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Can you please take the chair through your comments in that respect?
Chair, yes. If I can take you through the comments. First of all, in the preamble, they claimed, or the document claimed, that India is the largest milk producer in the world, which is true if you include buffalo milk into that calculation. And I'll get back to that. In Annexure 4 of my report, and that would be page 28, paginated, India is only the third biggest milk producing country in the world, with the combined EU and the United States number 1 and 2.
Can I just interject, Mr. Marais?
No
Can you
problem.
please explain what Annexure 4 reflects as appears at that paginated page 28?
Chair, yes, that's the statistics. The source of that would be the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, combined with the United States Department of Agriculture. They compiled these statistics through Statista, and it shows the major producers of cow milk worldwide for the period 2010 to 2012.
Now, you say in your comment that on page 16 of the report that India would only be the largest milk producer if buffalo milk is included.
That's correct, Chair.
But for purposes of this project, would buffalo milk have been relevant?
Chair, for the purposes of milk production in South Africa, buffalo milk will not be appropriate. The buffalo milk which is being produced in India is water buffalo, and it mustn't be confused with our African buffaloes that we have in South Africa, which we don't consume any milk of. So for this project, this specific one, you will focus on cow milk.
Yes. Now, that graph that appears as your annexure 4 to your report, which appears
I'm sorry. Did your study give you any indication as to what kind of percentage of milk produced in India would be buffalo milk? I'm asking that in the context of the statement being made in various documents in regard to this project that PRASA was or is the largest milk producer, I think in the world, I think that is what is being said, but certainly in India. So I wonder whether, to what extent a lot of that might relate to buffalo milk being part of what is taken into account.
Chair, I haven't looked specific into that percentage distribution.
Yes.
For the only reason buffalo milk is not consumed
would not
outside
be
of
relevant
India.
for us, yeah.
Unfortunately not, sir.
Yeah, okay. Well, you say unfortunately.
I say unfortunately I didn't look into the distribution of buffalo versus cow milk.
Yes, okay, all right.
Thank you, Chair. You then, in your comments to the preamble of the proposal, make reference to another annexure. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Can you please
that-
take the Chair through that particular annexure?
Chair, that would be Annexure 5, the second point in my comments. And Annexure 5 is the 20 major dairy companies.
Can I just confirm, if you turn to page 29,
That's
is that
correct.
Annexure 5? Thank you.
Annexure 5 and 29. So that's the 20 major dairy companies in 2012. And that list is sourced from the IFCN, the International Farm Comparison Network, of which South Africa and various countries in the world are a member of, India as well. In that list, you will only find one company listed in India, and that would be GCNMF, and that would be the 18th largest company, and in comparison to the rest.
So where
I'm sorry, I'm trying to, there is India number 18.
Number 18, Chair.
Yes, Chair.
So that is its ranking worldwide.
Chair, that's correct.
In terms of the milk it produces.
That's correct, Chair. That means that GCNMF would be the 18th largest country, 18th largest company in the world in terms of milk production.
So, to the extent that I may have understood some statements and some documents to suggest that, is it prior?
Paras.
Prasa?
Paras, Chair.
Paras, is the largest, whether in India or more than in India. On this document, that can't be true. At least in India, the largest milk producer would be the company mentioned here.
That's correct, sir.
Yes, okay.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Murray, do you have any idea of what ranking Paras may come at, if you have ever considered that?
Chair, unfortunately not. I've looked and searched how big they were, but couldn't find any information in relation to any of these companies, how big they were.
Well, one would have thought that if they are as big as certain documents suggest they are, it should be quite easy to find information about them.
Chair, that's correct. I would have assumed that as well, but I couldn't find any size of them in relation to these companies, which is, how can I put it, which is notified or noticeable companies in the dairy industry worldwide.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, Mr. Murray, as we have it, Mr. Tabetes makes the proposition that he did a Google search and Paras was one of the highest, if not in fact, he says the highest milk producing company in India.
Chair, I've noted that in some of the documents as well. I think that was only in one province of India and not in India in total. If they were bigger than GCNMF, that would have appeared in this list.
Yes. So your attitude would be that that can't be true.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps Mr. Tabete will provide clarification. You then deal with the proposed DART project as...
I'm sorry. You know, this issue of Paras concerns me. A few days ago, I raised the issue of whether they did actually sign the agreement that we are told they signed with Estina. It ought to be possible to obtain information about them from the High Commissioner of India in South Africa. You know, it ought to be possible to get as much information as possible about them if they are any significant role player in India. So maybe that should be explored.
Well, indeed, Chair, the investigators have written to the High Commissioner in India, and I believe they are still engaging them in respect of Paras.
Just repeat the second sentence.
The
You believe-
investigators of the Commission have written to the Commission in India, to the High Commission in India, and as far as we know as the legal team, there are ongoing engagements with the Commission in India, the High Commission in India.
Yes, you know, the investigators may be doing quite a good job, but you know, certain things just take long, you know. Simple things take long. Somebody within the legal team can just be in touch with the High Commissioner in India, and we can get information quite quickly, because this Paras, this company called Paras, is the pillar of the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development's justification for certain things in regard to this project. You know, if one, it doesn't exist, or if it does exist, but it's significantly much less than what, in size than what we have been told, it would throw a completely different complexion on the whole thing. So may I ask the legal team, please, not to just let the investigators, wait for the investigators, but to get involved themselves in getting information.
Indeed, so Chair, we will do likewise.
Thank you.
Chair. Mr. Murray, you then deal with the proposed flagship project aspect in the project proposal.
That's correct, Chair.
And what is your comment in that respect?
Chair, on paper it looks like a very good project, indeed a flagship project, but my concern or my comment on that was in the penultimate bullet on that page, and that would be page 30.
Okay, on what page are we now?
On page 33, Chair.
Page 3?
33.
33.
Page 33.
There is mention made of milk processing equipment. That's the second last bullet. Milk processing equipment needed for pasteurizing, cold storage, yogurt, etc., as well as distribution vehicles. It doesn't make any comment of what type of processing equipment. Will it be a normal batch pasteurizing equipment or UHT milk processing equipment? So from that sentence, it's fairly unclear.
Yes, and you state in your comment there that the UHT milk production, although in costing, a UHT plant is budgeted for at a substantial cost. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair. Later in one of the other documents, the business plan or the feasibility study, they've budgeted for UHT pasteurizers at a fairly substantial cost, and I covered that in those comments as well.
Yes, before we move on to the costing, are you drawing a distinction between UHT milk and pasteurized milk?
Yes, yeah, there's quite a difference. UHT milk is what we know in common language as box milk, the ones that you buy off the shelf. That's pasteurized at ultra high temperatures, from there the UHT. So it's above 100 degrees for a short period of time, while normal pasteurization is at around about 70 degrees, but for a longer period of time. So your shelf life for UHT milk is much longer than normal pasteurized milk, which makes it also more expensive to do UHT milk than normal pasteurization.
Yes, and you continue in your...
I see we are at 1 minute past 5. We can do one of two things. We can stop now and adjourn and continue next time, or we can go up to 1:15 to make sure we have done an hour. I'm easy.
Chair, we're in your hands, whichever works for you and
Yeah.
I would-
Maybe shall we go up to 1:15?
It's fine with me, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, let's go up to 1:15 and then adjourn.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Murray, you then deal with the third aspect of the project proposal, and you refer to it in your table at page 16 as second paragraph, and you make reference to page 5 of the project proposal, which appears at the paginated page 34. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
And what was your analysis in that respect?
Chair, they've commented on page 34 that in the short term, milk will be procured from local farmers and then processed in-house. This operation will then gradually be expanded to include the in-house rearing of milking cows. My comment on that was it raises concern to me because the availability of milk from local producers is actually declining. The number of milk dairy producers or milk farmers, especially in the Free State, is declining. So how can you match the two, and say you're going to buy from the local farmers if there is no local any farmers still in business anymore?
But also, and I don't know if it's something you deal with in the report, if the number of milk producers in the Free State had gone down over the years the way it had gone down, if you wanted to start a dairy business, you would interrogate that to say, why is the number of milk producers going down in this province, in this area? About X number of years ago, there were about, for argument's sake, 20 milk producers. Now there are only 5, because you would want to know whether you are not going to suffer the same fate. And you would want to interrogate that and see what caused those businesses to disappear. Do you have a solution to whatever the problem was?
Chair, yes, that was actually one of my overarching and final comments on all of these documents, is specifically the fact that you've mentioned just now the decline in the number of dairy producers. If I was an investor, I would have invested in a province where milk production is on the increase.
Yes.
And not on the decrease.
Yes.
So definitely I would have looked into that.
Yes, thank you.
Well then, can I refer you back to page 15 of the report? There where you have drawn a similarity between the project and the current trend, as we refer to it then, in the dairy industry. And you say that producers are getting bigger to achieve economies of scale. Is one able to reconcile that with what is intended in the second proposal, the second paragraph rather, that you have just dealt with in relation to short-term milk being procured from local farmers?
Chair, it is possible to reconcile that if you achieve economies of scale from the outset. But to build that up over time, it first of all takes a long time to build up a dairy herd. And secondly, if there is less smaller producers around you, it will become difficult for you to increase your production as well. So there is a possibility, but then you have to take other things to account as to buy in a lot of cows, and I cover that later in that report as well.
Yes. And what would be the impact insofar as costing, in line with the approach that they sought to pursue in that second paragraph that you have taken the chair through?
That would be the paragraph on page 34.
Yes,
then.
on page, pardon me while I find my page, that is page, I have it as page 33. No, it's actually page 34. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Page 34 that you have just dealt with.
So, Jay, the costing, there will be a fair difference between the costing because you have to buy in the milk then at a market-related price. Obviously, with close proximity to your own processing plant or dairy, you will probably have paid a premium for that milk because your transport cost will be less. The further away you are, the less, or you can negotiate a lower price to take the transport into account. So obviously that will also has to be taken into account when you draw up your cash flow and your project costing to buy that from your local producers around you. And sorry, Chair, just to add to that, if I remember correctly, I couldn't see any of that in any of the documentations that was received.
And thank you for that. You then continue to set out your investigation outcome on the project proposal. On page 16, if we return to that page, the fourth item that you address yourself to is what is described there in the content as Table 1.
That's correct.
And that relates to employment opportunities.
Chair, that's correct, yes.
Can you please explain that?
Chair, I've noted employment opportunities in that table. That's the last line.
When you say the last line, are we on page?
Apologies. Last line on page 34.
Thank you.
They've noted the employment opportunities of 600 people. Now, with dairy farms or milk farms getting more mechanized and bigger, the less opportunities or job creation opportunities exist. So there's limited opportunities in those areas. For a dairy of that magnitude, let's say in this case we take the 500 cows in milk scenario, a workforce of 50 would already have been big enough. So I think they've overstated the employment opportunities in that paragraph.
Yes. And if we still stay on page 34 at that table, there are other items that are listed there which you do not deal with in your report.
I'm sorry. There is a huge difference between 50 and 600. Is there any chance that 600 was a mistake made in good faith?
Chair, I suppose that's possible, that it can be a typing error. or, or perhaps,
No, Mr. Murray.
or perhaps, no, they can also be overstate or include, if they envisage to buy from the local dairy farmers, they could have included that employment opportunities into that as well.
No, but you've just said, on the basis, I think you said, of 500 head of cows, 500 cows, 50 would be a big enough number.
That's correct.
If they, for 500 cows, talk about 600, that's too huge. I mean, if they talked about 100, that would be double your estimate.
That's
So
correct.
how can 600 be anything other than a result of either complete ignorance of what is involved and therefore incompetence, or just a deliberate misstatement of facts?
Chair, I agree it can be either of those. I think if you look at, and hindsight is exact science, if you look at the project proposal now again, that would possibly be an overstatement to achieve certain objectives.
I mean, if I'm looking for people who are going to sweep this floor, you know, and I say I need 1,000 people, obviously you don't need 1,000 people to sweep this floor. And actually you don't need even 50. So if I come up with 1,000, there must be something else.
So,
Can't be good faith. Unless, it can be good faith if I really know nothing about sweeping.
that's also true, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So either I completely know nothing about this and therefore I'm just coming up with some figure, or if I know something about about sweeping, then I'm deliberately misstating the
Misstating the
facts.
numbers. That's also a possibility, Chair.
So, but
and perhaps
on reflection, what would be your take in terms of how anybody could come up with 600 in these circumstances?
Chair, if I look at some of the other numbers in the project costings and business plans, I think it might be a complete, I wouldn't say complete, but let's say a complete lack of knowledge of the dairy industry in this case.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Murray, what is interesting is very recently the Commission went to the farm, and the management there confirmed that there was about 41 employees who were currently employed there, and that would be much closer to 50 than 600.
That's correct, Chair.
So, yeah.
So it's possibly more than just a mistake, but hopefully someone will speak to that number. Chair, I note that it is 5:15. Would this be a convenient time to adjourn?
Yes, okay. We'll adjourn now, Mr. Murray.
Thank you, Chair.
We are not sitting for the next 2 weeks, so there will be no hearings. We will be back on the Monday of the 3rd week. Is that when Mr. Murray should come back?
Yes, please, Chair.
Yes. Do you know what the date will be?
It will be the 12th of August.
12th of August.
Yes, Chair.
So if you could come back on the 12th of August, it will be a Monday.
I will do so.
Yes. I think that we'll see all. Is there anything else?
Yes, Chair. We request to please start at 9:30 on the 12th of August, as we have a number of witnesses for that day.
How many witnesses do you have for that day?
It's 3 in total, Chair.
3, including Mr. Murray?
Yes, Chair.
I'm hesitant to fix 9:30, 2 weeks in advance. What if we started at 10, but we could go beyond 4? Would that be fine with you?
That is also fine, thank you, Chair.
Yes, so let's leave it at 10, but then we could go up to 5 and if need be, even beyond that.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Okay. We'll then adjourn the proceedings for the day. We adjourn.
All rise.